Welcome! Thank you for joining us for today's lesson. This is part of a 13-lesson series brought to you by the Food Trust Nutrition Educators. The Food Trust works to ensure that everyone has access to affordable, nutritious food and the information to make healthy choices. In this series, we'll be covering topics such as how to shop at a farmer's market, stretching your food dollars, storing fruits and vegetables, and more. Join us every other week as we share nutrition information from my plate, as well as tips and tricks to eating more healthy food at every meal. Each bi-weekly lesson will be followed by a recipe featuring a seasonal ingredient you can find at your local farmer's market or grocery store. Meet our nutrition educators, who you'll get to know through our lessons or recipe demonstrations. We're excited to have you with us. Thanks again for joining us. Please fill out our anonymous survey at the end of this video so that we can find out more about who we're reaching and how to serve our audience best. We hope you come back for our next lesson. See you then!
Welcome back to another Food Trust recipe. My name is Wayne. I'm a snack-led nutrition educator. And today's recipe is baked vegetable frittata. It's a great recipe to make, easy to make. You can eat it either warm or cold. Always, because we're going to use the oven, make sure you want to cut the oven on before you even get started, because you want the oven to be heat to a proper temperature so that when we do put the ingredients and everything in it, that we get an even cook. And then of course we want to use a skillet, so we take the skillet and we just want to put that on low, put just a little bit of cooking oil in it, just leave it on low, so when we put the eggs and the onions in there, the onions will be simmered and brown enough so that we can put them in for the mix. Before we get started, certainly you always want to wash your hands, and of course you want to wash any vegetables that you want to use. You want to wash them. They may have been washed before, but you want to wash them yourself here. Okay, we're going to start with the onion. And of course, because the onion's a roller, you want to cut the onion right here on both sides. That way there you get and keep control of the onion. Stop it from rolling on you. And so you want to just cut the ends off, because we're going to lay the onion down flat. Then of course you want to take all that off the skin. Not only the skin you want to take off, you want to take that second layer that sometimes we see laying there. You want to take that off too. And then once you have your onion cut like that, because it's not moving, it's easier to manage, easier to cut. And what you want to do is, again, you cut it, again, lay it flat, and you want to dice these onions. You dice them. That's why it's important to have a sharp knife. Because what a sharp knife does, among other things, a sharp knife allows us to get good cuts, even cuts across the board. And when you're cutting onions or any vegetables or fruit like this here, you want to be able to cut it in a way in which that you get some kind of uniformity. They don't have to be perfectly the same size, but you want to have them, especially when you're mixing them in a salad, or in this case here, you're going to mix them with the eggs. You wouldn't want onions that's kind of bigger than the rest of the onions. You want onions that's chopped similar to the same size. And this recipe here calls for the whole onion. So we're going to chop this whole onion up, make it very small so that we can, and then when we get to the broccoli and the basil, we want to chop that up as well, as small as we can get it. So again, that none of the vegetables be, really it's about size. You want to try to create a similar size if you can. Okay. Now it's up to you how big you want the onions. If you somebody that you like onions, you like onions a lot, then you may want to leave your onions just a little bit more, thicker or bigger. But for people that don't like onions too much, you don't want the onions to get in your way, you just chop them to you feel satisfied with it. If it's fine enough for you. Because remember, any recipe that you and I make, we're making a recipe that we want to eat. And if you're cooking for somebody else, certainly there is difference. But if you're cooking for like you and your family and you have an idea of what your family like, you always take that in consideration when you're cooking. The other thing is that this recipe calls for it's actually for 4 servings. Now say if you didn't want to do 4 servings, it was just 2 people that you was cooking for, what would you do? If it's just 2 people you're cooking for, what you would want to do in that case, you would cut down on the amount of the ingredients that you're going to use. Say for example, if you're just cooking for 2 people, because this recipe is designed for 4 servings, then you would use, as opposed to using 8 eggs, you would just simply use 4 eggs. As opposed to using a half a cup or a quarter cup of basil, you would just cut that down to a quarter cup of basil. It's not that complicated. It's not a lot of math that we will have to go into to do this. Now you want to turn the skillet on so that the pan will get a little hot before you put the onions in. You don't want the pan too hot, but just hot enough so that you can sizzle the onions. Normally you want to leave them in for no more like 7 minutes at the most. Just keep your eye on it. You just want to watch them. You just want them to get just brown, but not overcooked. So you put a little oil in the pan, let that oil get hot, let that sit there for a minute. And then we're going to add the onions. And while we're cutting the rest of the vegetables up, we're going to always want to keep our eye on the onions, stir them up every now and then. What I normally do is I put just a little, not much, just a little salt and pepper or any other ingredients that you might like. Once you put it in the pan with the oil, you have it sizzling, your spoon, stir them up. Hear that little noise, just let it sit, not long. Just a pinch of black pepper, not much. What it does for me, it gives the onions a flavor. It gives the salt and the pepper gives the onions a little flavor. Not much because we're going to use salt and pepper in the rest of the recipe. But what you want to do is with the oil and the salt and pepper and the onions, you end up by cooking it like that, you give the onions a little flavor as itself. So therefore the onions are not bland when they get mixed in with the rest of the ingredients. Now you want to chop the broccoli. You don't need, of course, this. You want to, and the leaves, you don't want them neither. So the broccoli, you want to, normally what I do, I chop the broccoli because I just really want the broccoli itself. I don't want the stem. Although the stem is not necessarily bad, but if you do use the stems, you're going to have to cut real deep to cut the stems down so that they won't be so thick and heavy. So they may end up getting in the way, so that's why I like to cut the stems off, because it's just too thick, especially when you're adding it with, eggs. You don't allow it to be smooth. So I like to get the stems off because what we just really want is the broccoli itself. And again, it's the same thing with the onions. You want to chop the broccoli in small little pieces where they really don't interfere with the texture of the eggs or the texture of the recipe itself. Small little pieces. Again, it don't have to be small, too small, just something that you're satisfied with. It's not too thick, it's not too heavy. I think it'll blend right in with the eggs. And the next thing you want to cut up is the basil leaves. You roll them up slightly so that you can have them all wrapped in one place. And you only need 1/4 cup of this. You don't want to put too much basil leaves in it or it will offset the taste. And that's true with all the ingredients. When you measure the ingredients, it's really designed to give you a balanced taste. If you put too much of anything in there, it gets you off it offsets the taste. So you just want to chop this up real fine, just like you did with the onions and the broccoli. So that would be a good mixture. And again, you just need a 1/4 cup of that and you are good. That's good. Right there. Chop it up real fine. Don't find no big chunks in there and you're good. Now that the onions seem to be just right simmered, what you want to do, you want to cut the stove off, let those onions just sit by themselves while we crack the eggs and mix that. Now that the vegetables are good and right, not too done, but done enough simmered, you want to move that into your eggs. Just pour that in there. Then you want to beat it again because you don't want to, of course, you don't want it to lump up. So we'll take that same fork, get a good mixture there. Good. Now for texture, we'll put that bread in there. Remember, the bread shouldn't be fresh bread. It should be more so like, not too long, but kind of stale. A day or two, just put it in the refrigerator, unwrap, let it get kind of hard. Because what it'll do, it will give the texture to the eggs like a grip. It will hold it together. Just mix that up. And again, make sure when you do this, I want to make sure that I'm doing it in terms of size, that I'm not making it too big, because that would defeat the whole purpose of cutting the onions up in the way that we did and the broccoli the way that we did. We want to try to make sure that everything stays a similar size, especially with this bread. Now, of course, with the bread, you could use rice, day-old rice that you already cooked, or any other thing that you would like to use to give it texture. Here, we're just going to use the bread. Mix that up. Get a chance to see that. That looks good. Now what we're going to do is put just about 1/2 cup of cheese. Just mix it in there. Because we're going to put it in the oven, it really doesn't matter because, of course, as you know, the cheese is going to melt. But what I want to do is put the cheese in there now, so when the cheese melts, it actually become a part of the texture of the egg itself, as opposed to be separate. It's almost like making the egg in itself, the cheese in itself, a part of the recipe. In terms of like the salt and pepper, it's a seasoning. You're using it in that way. Okay. Now once you have everything done, your mixture is ready. Now you want to just put just a teaspoon of oil. Any kind of oil you have is good. Teaspoon of oil, and then of course you want to make sure that that oil is rubbed on not only at the bottom of the pan, but even on the edges, because of course you don't want it to get stick. Okay. Then you mix this again. Then you begin to pour your stuff in. And that's what it will look like going in. What it's going to look like going out when it actually cooked, it's going to be, of course, because it's eggs and cheese, vegetables, it's going to be just like a pie. And that's the goodness of this recipe in itself. Because it's like a pie, you can either eat it warm or you can eat it cold. And after 45 minutes in the oven, this is what it will look like. Baked vegetable frittata. Good. It's done all the way through. Don't forget to fill out the survey at the end and look for the next recipe done.